Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the OTT.X Wednesday webinar series. On behalf of all of us at OTT.X, I want to thank you for joining us today. This series where we bring you insightful, thought-provoking presentations across a broad spectrum of OTT-related topics from thought leaders across our industry. We've really been looking forward to this week's session, which is being presented by Whip Media. First off, a big thank you to Whip Media for supporting OTT.X through participation in our webinars, events, roundtable discussions, and working groups. It's a pleasure to once again have with us Cory Sher, Vice President of Global Enterprise Account Management for Whip Media. Cory is as a media industry veteran who has worked in media research for over a decade and for some of the world's largest entertainment organizations who measure, acquire, distribute, and monetize video content. In his presentation today entitled Unifying Disjointed Business Units to Capitalize on the Value of Your Content, Cory discusses the importance of having a connected 360-degree view across your organization, complemented with the right data to maximize the value of content while controlling costs. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cory to get things kicked off. Welcome.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Thanks so much for that intro and excited to be here. Thanks to OTT.X. We're always excited to support OTT.X, and thanks everybody for joining me this morning. I hope that you find what we present today insightful and helps your business. And of course, we want to make sure that we answer your questions. So we'll stop at part two, between part one and part two of the presentation, and answer any questions that you might have. But with that, let's jump in. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully all of this works according to plan, and let's launch this. And hopefully everybody can see my screen. All right, so as Eric said, we are talking today, the discussion of today's topic is unifying disjointed business units to capitalize on the value of your content. And what we want to focus on today is really how we are bringing together different business units and being able to streamline that process and make it much more effective, much more efficient, especially when you're looking at the world of content, right? So the first part that we're going to focus on today is really the insights part, and we're going to look at data, and then we're going to look at the way to manage all of that content once you've acquired the content or distributed the content, depending on what the ultimate goal is. But one thing that we want to start out with is really telling you a little bit about Whip Media. So Whip Media, and we'll get into a little bit more of the detail, of course, of all the different companies that comprise Whip Media, but we really are a global enterprise SaaS solution. So what we think, when you think about Whip Media, we are powering the content lifecycle throughout the entire entertainment ecosystem from start to finish. And what we mean by that is we're gathering insights from our consumer app. We are creating and in beta right now of a rights marketplace for buyers and sellers of content, managing all that process with a performance score to ensure that you're buying the right content for the right platform, depending on what you're representing. We're managing the content planning and licensing process. We're incorporating media supply chain partners where necessary, ensuring that subbing and dubbing and all of that is accurate from end to end. We're measuring performance tracking, whether it is TVOD or EST or SVOD, all of that is being tracked through our SaaS platform. And then of course, managing the financial components of all of this, making sure that royalties, that the contracts line up with royalty payments, that the division of revenue shares is accurate. All of this is really important in order to ensure, as we'll get into, that you're managing the process correctly, that those units are talking with each other, and that you're getting the most value out of your content. So we've created what we call a centralized content hub that integrates workflows, data, and people to drive efficiencies, increase revenue, reduce revenue leakage, cut costs, and predict title performance. So how do we do that? And what have we done at Whip Media to really ensure that we are creating that ecosystem? So what we did was we started with acquiring TV Time in 2016. Now that is a consumer app that is completely free. You can download it whether you're iOS or Android. Over 18 million global users of this app in 100 different countries. Discover content, track their content, and importantly, report their engagement around that content, whether it's sentiment, whether it's their favorite characters, write commentary, all of that. So we really call that the mirror to the consumer. We're really what we call the why behind the watch. We're not really focused on the eyeballs. We're really focused more on those eyeballs that are watching and why are they watching content. So having that first party data is really key. In 2019, we also acquired a company called the TVDB, which stands for the Television Database. This is a crowdsourced platform that's available with over 5 million global TV shows and movies around the world. It's a metadata source managed by about 15,000 different contributors and over 20 different moderators around the world. And then we have a whole team of people here in Los Angeles, where we're based, that manage that process. And why is that important? We really see that there's such a need for metadata in our industry, as you know well today. And having that context to be able to not only power our TV time data, or whether it's powering our content marketplace that we are now building, it's important to have that information in a timely fashion and make sure that all that metadata is accurate. And then I would say last but not least at all is the acquisition we also made in 2019 for MediaMorph. MediaMorph is a SaaS enterprise platform that manages the end-to-end process of content. Whether it's video on demand or digital sales, we are managing that entire workflow and making sure that the contracts are connected to, again, the right royalty payments, making sure that the supply chain partners are integrated at the right points. And then we're tracking all of that performance data from all of those transactions that are occurring. And we do this for all of the major top movie studios, both majors, mini majors. We do it for MVPDs, we do it for telcos, and of course, broadcast and cable networks. We brought these companies together because these assets really complete that ecosystem, combining first-party data from a consumer perspective, having the right metadata, and then of course, having that end-to-end process. So all of that rolls up under the umbrella of Whip Media Group. So you probably have been hearing a lot about us in the press and all the things that we're doing, but it's really important that you understand why we put this company together the way we did and what are the pieces of Whip Media Group. So getting into the weeds a little bit of just the amount of data that we are collecting, and these numbers are up to date, and it seems a little bit hyperbolic when you first look at it, but these are true numbers. 2.3 trillion sales transactions are processed through our MediaMorph sales platform, enterprise software solution platform, whether it's TVOD, SVOD, AVOD, over 170 countries. We're collecting all of that transactional data. We're collecting 5 million pieces of content from around 600,000 unique TV and movie titles that we're monitoring every single day. We have over 19 billion real TV time and movie consumer insights that we're gathering via our TV Time app. And we're combining all of that into one enterprise solution platform. And we'll talk more about that as we get into the data a little bit. So this is the first part of the presentation that I think is really going to be key in understanding content as a way to focus on data. And how can data help you make content decisions, make more effective content decisions in the buying and selling of content, but also in understanding where content is going as we continue to see more fragmentation, we continue to see more spend, and where are those consumers going day to day. So we know that content spend is in the billions. And when we started to first measure how much the players, the biggest players out there are, spending on content, it used to be Netflix that was really at the top. And we would see a lot of that in the press where we would, read how much money each year Netflix is spending in the billions of content. But when you look at now the proliferation of streaming platforms across the biggest players in the industry outside of Netflix, including Disney, the recent merger between Warner and Discovery with Discovery Plus, and you have HBO Max, of course, NBC Universal on the scene, not only with all of their brands, but with Peacock. We are now seeing that the infiltration of content spend is growing, and Disney leading the pack. Netflix number 4, and then of course Viacom, CBS with Paramount Plus, and then Amazon Prime also, of course, at the bottom, but still spending billions of dollars on content. And of course, some of this is going into original content. This is acquiring content. And if you look at the top 3, Disney, Warner, and NBC, a lot of that has to do with sports. And one of the things that we're hearing a lot about is where should that content spend be going in the future if we're covering the gamut of sports, original, and library content, and the focus on live events and seeing where the audience wants more. And we were all in lockdown, of course. There was so much content to choose from, but now where do we go from there? And where do we spend those valuable dollars? So again, really understanding the landscape is critical to know what is in demand by territory, and having a footprint and having a pulse on that globally is really imperative. So when you look at today and you focus on, let's say, a territory like Latin America, an extremely important territory, where as we see the globalization of content is really outside the United States, Latin America being one of those very, very important crucial markets. You can see on the left side of the screen what catalogs are currently available in those markets. So we have the ability to look at catalogs in every single market on over 2,000 different platforms. And as you can see, drama and comedy leads the charge. Not a surprise. The catalog on Netflix that's currently available in their TV library in Latin America also includes animation as the number 3 most available content in their library. But as you can see to the right, where you look at the Netflix view breakdown by genre and the data that we're collecting from the TV Time app in those countries, especially around important markets like Brazil, drama and comedy leads the charge of actual viewership and engagement. But you'll look to see that animation is actually quite low on the totem pole as far as actual viewership. So we're not saying here that Netflix is getting it wrong in Latin America, but what we are saying is that we have a pulse on what's actually happening and how those genres are changing. And what's important about this is, if you're not Netflix, having that pulse on the competition and being able to understand what that content is doing and how it's performing in those markets, secondary to what's available in those markets. Another way to explore content, of course, is really understanding where the viewer is going. And how do you create a platform that is really speaking to what viewers want to see? So if we go out to a very large market that we cover, France, and we look at viewers of Star's original programming and what they're watching on other platforms, you can see that the top affinity titles among series first released in 20 to 2021 were primarily on HBO. And you can see that genres like dark fantasy, psychological thrillers, and crime really could inform Stars to make decisions around what type of content needs to be developed in that market. So again, really understanding not only what your catalog versus what's being viewed is important, but also where are those viewers going? Where are they gravitating to? Which is clearly what they're yearning for more content. So again, it's important to have that first party data to understand what's happening in those global regional markets. Now, one of the things that we do at WIT Media with our first party data and our TV Time consumer app is we have the ability to look at followers ahead of the debut of a particular show or movie. So you can go into the app, for example, and follow a particular program before it airs. So once it's announced, it goes into the TV Time app and consumers can then follow it, which is a clear intent to view. And as you'll see with this graph here, we're looking at what we call pre-anticipation of content ahead of its release, and then looking at what that content looked like post-release. So if we go back as much as 30 days before The Witcher or Jupiter's Legacy actually debuted, you can see that there was a tremendous amount of traction for The Witcher from that 30 days before debut all the way out to day of release. And then, of course, the content took off. If you look at Jupiter's Legacy, which unfortunately didn't make it past its first season, you can see that up to 30 days ahead of its debut, in our data, we could see that there was low anticipation of that particular piece of content. It came out of the gate, of course, with marketing, with recommendation engines that are out there and available. You could see that people tuned in, but it slowly drifted off. This is really critical because understanding this particular scenario between The Witcher and Jupiter's Legacy tells us a really good story of how content is looking again ahead of its debut. But this is an opportunity for you to change your marketing strategy, look at what's happening ahead of its debut and where we need to reach followers based on affinity data. But it also gives us an indication of maybe there's something wrong here with the storyline. Maybe there's something wrong with the characters or with the marketing strategy all along. We don't really know until we look at the data, and then we can actually analyze that, or even go out with a survey and ask people who are following the show why they chose to follow it, and then ask them post-release what happened, why didn't they decide to convert as actual viewers. So again, having a pulse on pre-anticipation of content is really key in your strategy, that once you've spent that money, once you put the resources towards content, how can we ensure that that's going to be an effective strategy once that show is released? Now, no surprise here, really, when the Olympics finally debuted this year, NBC used this as an opportunity to really promote their upcoming fall shows, including big names, big titles like Ordinary Joe and La Brea. And through their promotion, of course, during the Olympics, not a surprise, but those shows gained a lot of traction in our data. We could see that as follower growth of both of these shows really took off. So this is really just more of a validation of how that pre-anticipation and follower growth can look and can really give you an indication of how series are looking ahead of their debut. This was a little biased just because there was so much promotion, but again, this was a great opportunity for NBC to show off some of those fall shows. Now, when you think about development of content and content spend and where can I get the most money out of existing content or existing talent, it's obvious that you really need to have, again, an understanding of what's happening in these local markets. So if we take a look at the local French market and we think about who are the talents that are really gaining traction amongst French viewers, and is there an opportunity here to branch off and create formats that would garner second availability of those particular actors? Or maybe they're already in the show, which really indicates that we should create a format here and go global, more global with those particular actors and those particular formats. So looking at who are the leading, most fan-favorited talent amongst French viewers gives us an indication of this. And of course, we'd want to dive deeper, look at those shows, maybe go out and survey those particular viewers. But again, being able to have a pulse in those local markets and where content can travel is really, really important. And there's no doubt that we saw this with Yara Shahidi in our data from the hit series Blackish, where you can see that early on character votes were very significant in early season development of the show. And then her character just took off in the second season, which was amazing. And you could see that people really were starting to gravitate to Yahara Shahidi. And there's no doubt that ABC saw this as well. And they gave her a spinoff called Grownish, which is now, in its fourth season and doing great. So again, really having a pulse on what's happening can really help directionally tell you where the next series needs to be, where we need to develop characters, and where there's potential for spin-offs. But as we started with the presentation in talking about really what we call the why behind the watch, right? There's data sources that will tell you eyeballs, the number of people that are watching. And that's really important, especially from an advertising perspective. But understanding too, as we have the proliferation of streamers, how engaged that audience is also super important, because engagement, even with a smaller audience, means that we have a potential here to really grow that audience, really grow that show. And of course, there's more money if we can do that. So if we look at top local Italian TV series in the crime genre, and we look at specific engagement metrics like conversion rate, completion rate, engagement score, and star rating, we can see that the show Petra does very, very well. So what do we mean first off by conversion rate? So it's important to understand, remember the pre-anticipation that we talked about of follower growth ahead of a show's debut. And what was the conversion rate from people that said, I'm interested, I have an intent to watch, to those that actually ended up watching the show. So that's where the conversion rate is really key. And we could see that with Petra. We could also see that, and I'm not going to try to pronounce these names in Italian, but we'll just call this show number 4 and 5, also had great conversion rates. But then we want to look at what the completion rate was. And what we mean by completion rate is not the amount of time spent, although that's a very important metric. But we know that streamers like Netflix, for example, will look at 2 minutes of viewing and consider that almost like a completion rate. And it's an important view, but it's really not, it's not an indicator if somebody actually sat down and watched the entire program. So when we think about completion rate, we look at people who have actually watched all available seasons, all available episodes of that particular show. And you can see with Petra, the completion rate was very high. Now, engagement score is also important. And what we mean by engagement score is when we take a person's input in the TV Time app, that means, did they vote for a character of that show? Did they mark a favorite character? Did they write commentary? Did they report their sentiment of how that particular piece of content made them feel? That all goes into the engagement score. And of course, we weight that because it's important to give credit or more credit to someone who writes a comment rather than somebody who just gives it a rating. So people were very actively engaged with this show. So having these KPIs and benchmarking them against other shows is important to know, all right, we've got a success here. This is a show that we can monetize further, maybe create a format that we can take outside of Italy. Again, let's look at the character development and fan favorites like we did in the previous slide in France. Or if it's unfortunately a show over here, then let's figure out how we fix it. And is that show, fixable at that particular stage? So again, having a grasp of what's going on is really key to understand how can I further monetize? How can I further make this show successful or other formats that's going to garner, of course, more profit for my platform. So again, very, very important. So I want to stop here because we want to move on to, now that you've really looked at the data and analyzed what's working, what's not working, what can be monetized outside of a particular region like Italy or France, and how do you get the most monetization from a show? We want to talk about what happens on the back end, and how do you manage that process to further maximize profit using our content value management platform through MediaMore. But before I do that, let me stop here and see if anyone has any questions. I think we may have a few questions in the chat.
Yes, terrific. Thank you. First of all, I want to ask or suggest the folks attending, by all means, do drop your questions into the Q&A bin. We'd love to get you involved in the program today. I just want to start by commenting, Cory, like, is that right? When you went through the spend by the major platforms, was that on an annual basis?
That's on an annual basis.
That comes out to like $100 billion a year.
Yeah. Disney was like over almost close to 25 billion alone in that particular graph.
Good God, that is a lot of money, and it's a lot of content being produced, being licensed. It does make you kind of wonder, how do you stand out? How, with that, there's so much content, and they're just kind of shooting money out of a fire hose, and getting your content to stand out, or finding out what is, what's working, I think through the data you're talking about, can be extremely important.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because, and it's not necessarily fair in total to Netflix in that particular graph, because Netflix doesn't provide, as we know, live sports. And a lot of that content spend goes to sports content because of the rights, for example. But it's still important, right? Because we're still trying to attract as many viewers as we can. So we've got to be efficient with our content spend. But it's impressive that as much money that Netflix is spending doesn't include sports. So you can see how much original content or library content is really costing.
Yeah, it's I don't know, maybe a war of attrition at some point. We'll see if it ever slows down. We do have a question about the kind of the algorithm that y'all are using in TV time, and that is, how do you differentiate between, and this is specific to The Witcher, but it could be applicable to across other content and in different ways. How do you differentiate between The Witcher's game show anticipation? You see the Witcher as a title. How do you know whether someone that is liking it, or if there's some buzz about it, whether it relates to the show or to the gameplay?
Well, how it relates to the show is that when a show is announced, it enters the TVDB, which is our metadata source. And then that eventually enters into the TV Time app. And the user of the TV Time app, again, there's no incentive for the user to use it. We don't even allow for paid advertising so that we don't bias the data. We present all the available content the same way. So here is the synopsis of the show. Here's what the show's about. If there's a trailer available, we'll post a trailer. So the user, either based on their recommendation engine, we recommend content based on their current library of what they're watching, can then follow that show in the app, and then they're notified, when that show is about to debut. And that's really the utility from a consumer perspective. So we don't really have an algorithm per se, other than the recommendation engine. So if I'm watching, shows that are similar to The Witcher, I'm going to get content that is, recommended to me because obviously I like that particular type of content. But there's no bias that we're going to put The Witcher ahead of Jupiter's Legacy, or, if there's a big title out there that's getting a lot of marketing or a lot of press, we're definitely not going to rank that higher in the recommendation engine. Our data science team is very adamant about not doing that, because we want to make sure that that first party data is not biased towards, a particular piece of content.
Your data is coming from TV Time app, and it's specific to movies and television content. It's not coming from the open internet. In other words, there's a lot of buzz that we're seeing in terms of likes on social media, which you could probably count if you went to The Witcher's page, or there'd be a lot of buzz, and that's not the way that you're measuring it. It's
no, and that's really important. Yeah. That's a really important point, Eric. So we do not scrape from social media. We do not scrape from Twitter or Facebook. We don't scrape from Wikipedia. There's value to that. There's no question about it. But there's also inherent, risk that somebody could be going and searching, like you just said, on The Witcher, and it could be for a reason that has nothing to do with that title. So we have made it really important or imperative in our data set that we are only using social listening within our own app. So if somebody writes a comment or shares a meme in the app, the data that we're collecting is only from the TV Time app. So we provide a different value, based on that consumer mirror than, let's say, other sources that might be scraping from those, multiple social insights.
Got it. Yeah, that is important. It also prevents things from being kind of spoofed, I guess, which is always a possibility in social. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's provides obviously some insight into where a title may be heading, and also an opportunity to adjust potentially your marketing or your promotion. Now, have you seen cases where it's actually helped to turn something around for a title?
Yeah, we're a major input of information pre-launch for a number of our clients, and what we have seen is the ability to change marketing strategy, Now, of course, there are internal sources that our clients use as well to validate what we're seeing. And they will go in and look at what's happening. If there's a problem or an issue with a show, there's that opportunity to, yeah, exactly that. Change your marketing strategy. What's your P&A? What are you doing to market? What's the affinity? Where do we need to go to reach new viewers? Things like that. We also have the capability, though, of surveying our TV time users. So there's that ability to capture the data through the app, but then there's also the ability to go out and ask questions. And if there's a problem with the marketing strategy, we can ask questions to those users that are following. How did you hear about it? Was it TV? Was it, other forms of marketing? Was it mostly social media, or did you just hear about the show from your friends? And that can also give us a really good indication, and we can break it out by age, gender, to see how the market's responding to the marketing strategy. And if we're not, or if the studio or the platform isn't reaching a particular demographic very well, we can see that, and then they can say, okay, maybe we need to go after men 18 to 34 more than we are, because we're really attracting, women 25 to 54, but we're really lacking here in that younger demo with males. So there is a way to be able to adjust that as needed.
Yeah, and with the affinity data that you have also, it really helps you set kind of your expectations, right? We think this show is a lot like this show. Why are we not seeing the same results in terms of engagement or conversions, whatever it might have been? What's going on? Maybe our affinity is wrong. Maybe something else is wrong. What can we do to kind of adjust this, or what should we do? Yeah, I think one more question here, and then we'll let you kind of turn the page,
Sure.
Cory. So. Question is, how do you recruit users to the TV Time app? How does someone find out about or get recruited to be amongst your cadre of TV Time appers?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get that question a lot. We do not do a lot of active recruitment, right? So we're not putting together a panel, so to speak. The TV Time app was actually created in France a number of years ago. And when we acquired it in 2016, we had already a large contingency of users throughout EMEA, for example. And all of that growth up to that point was organic. So it was viral, word of mouth, people saying, hey, here's a way to track all this content. We have so much content that's out there. How do we keep track of it by episode? How do we know what's coming out? Where do I find this content? And there was also, a proliferation of American content that was overseas that people really wanted to find out, well, how do I watch this? And people are talking about The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. What is this show? Or Stranger Things. So through that, there was a lot of viral growth, organic growth of the app. There are regions where we'll go out and do some marketing of the app, but for the most part, we have really grown from, where I started. I think when I started with the company 3 years ago, we were at like 8 or 9 million. We're up to 18 million registered users now. We just won the Webby Award as the best tracking app of its kind. So against, I think there were 13,000 different entries. So people like the utility of it. And so we don't have to do recruitment really now, of course, we want to grow our user base tremendously. But we're collecting 500,000 monthly active users in France, for example, every single month, or we're collecting, near that point in Brazil. And our panels in the United States are quite large. So, of course we want to grow and we want to be popular. We're not trying to be Snapchat. We're not trying to be Facebook, right? We're providing a utility and hoping that the consumer is really getting that utility and getting the most out of the app, and then spreading it and telling their friends.
Yeah. So, and first and foremost, it's a consumer app, and that's where it started, is as a utility for consumers. And y'all just found a really cool application for the data that you're collecting from that. Yeah, that's really it's fascinating. All right, so why don't we get things kicked off for part two of your story?
All right, that sounds good. So the first part of the presentation, we really wanted to focus on the consumer mirror, right? And that's really the data, the first party data that we're collecting from the TV Time app. But now what we want to focus on really is our SaaS enterprise software solution through MediaMorph that manages this process for you specifically today, we're going to focus on our finance platform, or what we call CVM Finance. And the reason why we feel like this is incredibly important is it's one thing to try to manage that cost containment when it comes to developing new content or buying library content, but there's also a real need to manage the process behind the scenes. So once those dollars start coming in, really understanding where is the revenue leakage happening? Where can we cost contain and maximize those dollars so that when at the end of the day, we're really recouping most of those production costs, whether it's a movie or a TV series. And this is really where the unification of disjointed divisions within companies, within studios is occurring. And you may or may not be aware, but a lot of this process is being done still on spreadsheets. And it's a very antiquated way of doing it. So you can have all the first party data in the world and manage that content to the point of release. But if you're not managing it on the back end, then you're losing dollars. So the way that we want to start this part off is really talking about that waterfall, that accounting waterfall that occurs with a particular title. So if you look at a movie like A Quiet Place, it grossed nearly $300 million worldwide. And with the layers of viewership and distribution that takes place within a particular title within a particular studio, you can see it has its theatrical debut, it has its non-theatrical, all the way down through its VOD, electronic sell-through, SVOD, and AVOD. And home entertainment, of course, is still very much a part of that. So you have this waterfall where you've got your gross income received by your distributors, you've got your fees, you've got your taxes, you have layers and layers of things within your contracts that you have to pay out. There might be credits that you have to account for. There's royalties, there's revenue shares, all of that. When you get down to net income received by sales agents and you're trying to recoup your costs, and you get down all the way to the bottom is your net profit. So there's a lot of layers that are happening here in this accounting waterfall. And so it's important to make sure that this is all being managed properly, and that there's a vision into what's going on that easily other divisions, whether it's legal or whether it's sales, all have input and see what's going on at a moments by moments basis. So having a roadmap is important to maximize content revenue. And that's what really CVM Finance does. So let's start off with, what are the components of that roadmap? So as we said, there's so many layers to agreements these days when it comes to managing rights, managing those costs and terms across all deal types, whether it's SVOD, AVOD, TVOD, EST, there's so many. So understanding your agreements is imperative. Being able to track your costs and processing your payments is really important. If you don't know what those payments are, or you're not tracking them effectively, then you really don't have a grasp on what's going on, not only with one type of content, but with multiple types of content. Being able to track performance and other data is imperative as well. So sources, usage, and viewing information, including return path data, third-party platform data, and social data, as we talked in the Q&A just a minute ago, is also really important. And having the ability to incorporate that and ingest that into one platform is vital. And all of this, of course, when you integrate your contracts, your costs, your payments, your performance, you now have an understanding of the real value of your content. And as our clients like to say, the goal here is maximize profits, reduce revenue leakage. And I love that term, because we do that in our lives all the time, right? We're deciding at that basic level, how many streaming platforms can we afford to subscribe to? Where can we reduce costs? So that's what we're doing. We're doing this on a massive scale, and you can't do that until you have all the information in one place. So unifying every aspect of your organization in understanding and having direct communication and access to this information is vital. And I think everybody that's on the call that's listening today who works in our industry, we all know that we don't work in a vacuum. Our financial teams don't work in a vacuum. Sales must be in the loop of what's happening with your acquisition teams. If they don't know what's going on and understanding the performance of content, then we've got real issues. And being able to understand and manage those contracts, being able to know exactly where we are from a profitability standpoint, where we are from a cost standpoint is vital for your finance and legal departments. And then ultimately understanding at a granular level the amount of spend that you have left over for marketing, or where you've spent too much in marketing, for example, is the way to unify this. So our ability to do this through CVM Finance really brings together all of these divisions and unifies them into one place. So it's a workflow, and it takes the ability of all of this that used to be managed again on spreadsheets, or what we call spreadsheet hell, so to speak. And these are terms that our clients have told us. And we put it into a workflow that communicates with each other, right? So questions that you need to ask today of your systems are you validating the accuracy of license payments based on contracted terms? So understanding your contract. It's impossible for people to go through every line of every contract and understand what those layers mean. So through our workflow, we're able to ingest those contracts. And the system is designed to be able to read those contracts and be able to pay out royalties, be able to pay out those revenue shares accurately and in a timely fashion. So you need to ask yourself, how are you currently doing that with your contracted terms? You also have to ask, are you supporting revenue recognition and allocation for multiple types? We don't live in a world anymore of 3 broadcast networks or 500 cable networks. We now have thousands of streaming platforms, and they're all over the world. So how do you manage that revenue recognition? How do you understand how that differs by currency? How do you calculate those currency differences? So that's also very important. And that is something that we also incorporate in this workflow. So think of us in the next point as a fully audible solution that sits on the front end of your ERP. So we don't really touch the back end of the ERP. We are really the integrated platform, or all of the integrated data that feeds into SAP and to Oracle. And then the back end for closing all the month, all of the dollars at the end of the month, that is on the back end, or the other side of the SAP. So we are truly on that first half. So you need to make sure with your current solutions, are you integrating directly into these major ERP systems like SAP or Oracle? So we can do that. This also allows you, of course, to have an audible system, making sure that if you are setting yourself up for an audit, that you have all the information ahead of that and it's accurate. And then, of course, being able to generate invoice and billing, primarily through the ERPs, and accurate royalty reporting as well. And of course, there's tons of factors there, including revenue shares and massive amounts of data that has to be looked at in comparison to the contracts, of course, that are in place. The other thing I want to point out why this is important is we're ingesting so much data, especially around POS data, for example. And this really gives you an indication of where to forecast. Because when you're ingesting so much POS data, not all of that data comes in at the same time. Vendors don't pay, as we all know, whether it's iTunes or Amazon, they don't pay at the same time. So having a grasp of what is going on in arrears as close to proximity is incredibly vital, because that is going to help you with your forecast. And what we have seen in our data is we're ingesting all of this POS data. We can get to between 3 and 5% accuracy when it comes to forecasting. So if you don't have a grasp of your business and where all of this spending is occurring, then you can't grasp forecasting accurately. And of course, that is incredibly vital to your business. That's incredibly vital to your boards and to your shareholders at the end of the day. So all of this is incredibly important through this workflow. So we're automating these workflow we're creating automated workflow efficiencies and getting rid of the inefficiencies. We're doing this end to end. We're streamlining and centralizing these avails and the distribution across multiple platforms around the world again. Ultimately, this is improving the accuracy, it's improving their reporting and the revenue recognition while the integration to your ERP systems is taking place at the same time. So obviously, this results in providing better monitoring and accuracy of terms and compliance. You can be assured that these payments and that this revenue recognition is based on your contracts. This is going to help you, of course, when it comes time to being audited. You want to make sure that you're able to support high volume, and we can do that. As you saw, it's literally in the trillions of the amount of data that we're processing for nearly all the major studios. And again, at the end of the day, this is going to achieve better optics on content performance, and it's going to inform better decisions across all of your units. Again, whether that's sales, finance, legal, marketing, or acquisition. So as a summary, just want to give you an idea, what we always call our brag slide, that we really work through these solutions with every major studio, MVPD player, telco, streaming platform, other major brands, cable broadcast networks. So we're proud to have really built a system, and again, really built an ecosystem that encompasses not only the CVM finance solution, but the first party data, the CVM VOD solution, managing that end to end for all of video on demand, and of course, the entire digital sales platform that we've created as well. So not only that, but again, we're also creating a marketplace where buying and selling of content can take place. And we're really trying to answer all of these questions for our clients accurately, effectively, and efficiently. And at the end of the day, it's all about creating the best content, and it's all about, saving the most money, but also making sure that that spend is as accurate and as thoughtful and strategic as possible. So with that, that's the end of the slides, and happy to take some questions.
Thanks once again, Cory. Yeah, so we'd love to get, we have time for a few more questions here. So love to hear from you about that. You talk about unifying all these aspects of your organization, and it's something that I think that when you're super small as an organization, like maybe it's as a sole proprietor, all those things kind of happen in your head, and you're able to sort of, like, for the most part, it's much easier to organize them. But as you grow, now what you find is you've got organizations that they start to get bigger, and they each kind of have their own motivations, their own properties, and keeping them communicating and working together, it can be extremely challenging, and it's really, really important that they do that. So it's great to see you're thinking about that and offering solutions for folks. Right. In that regard.
I think one thing I would mention too, Eric, because you bring up a really good point there too, this is also not just about unification and communication between divisions, it's also about security and being able to make sure that all of this vital proprietary IP is protected. So if your financials aren't protected, that's making you vulnerable. So being able to be in the cloud, being protected, getting away from spreadsheets where things can leak, that's why we've built these systems, and we're SOX compliant, and we're happy to take people through all of that, compliance to make sure that they're comfortable. And again, we work with all the major studios. They're not going to put their trust in us unless we have those systems in place. So I just wanted to highlight the security there too.
Yeah, very good point. I mean, it's it's not just fun and games. There's this stuff's the data is really, really can be very, very confidential. It needs to be treated with a lot of respect when it comes to privacy and security. Let's see, how are we for time? We do have a couple of questions here, Cory, so why don't we get to that? So in terms of consumption data, how do you face the post-pandemic landscape where blockbusters open day and date, theatrical and online? Yeah, interesting question.
So how do we measure that, I guess, is really the the question there, or?
Well, and the question goes on, when you cross data from every business unit to get insights that can be useful when content providers think of the release strategy for their next project. So you've got
Right.
something coming out at the same time in theatrical and day and date online.
Yeah, so that's a really great question, because as we've seen, that was good and bad for studios during the pandemic, and of course studios pushed releases of their content to hope that the pandemic would settle down and then not have to do day and date. But there's also positives to day and date. But to get back to the question, having that unification of business units and being able to look at the data and look at the performance of content both on streaming platforms versus or VOD versus theatrical is imperative. So having that performance data across all those platforms is incredibly vital. I will also say that understanding how those contracts read when it comes to day and date is also very important, because we're dealing here with revenue splits, we're dealing with royalties. There's lawsuits that are occurring today, as we know, because of the day and date release of content, especially as it relates to talent. So really having your ducks in a row and being able to communicate on past performance data, and then looking at those platforms separately of how content's performed is really imperative to understand, how do you move forward and what makes sense in the future for day and date, and then how do we change our agreements to ensure that we're not getting ourselves in trouble with doing a day and date release.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up a good point too. The business is constantly changing, right? I mean, this wasn't really an issue, a year and a half ago or whatever it was, and now, it is. And so I would imagine that, you're keeping your engineers, your product managers pretty busy,
Yes.
as you'll have to adjust your platform.
Yeah, it's very, very busy, and we customize these. Like, for example, CVM Insights, or CVM Finance, I'm sorry, or CVM Bot. These are very customized platforms for the needs of our clients. So it's not, we have designed it that way because every studio, whether you're big or medium or a small platform in a foreign country, we can manage this process with bespoke type, setup. So that it is answering the questions and giving you the information that you need, because it's so fragmented and happening so fast. And then we can grow with those platforms or with those studios as they grow and develop more content and of course, release that content.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point about that. And data is so important. We all want it. Big data, I need all the data, give me the data. But then, okay, well, let's say you get all the data. Now what? Like, are you actually able to use it and to inform decisions, or are you drowning in it? And plus, it's not just the data that you thought you wanted last year that now you're finally able to get. Well, like 10 things have changed since then, so now you need new data. And taking that on yourself, you should really pay attention to what you're getting into when you start trying to acquire all the data for your business.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because you can have data overload, and there can be so much data that you don't know what to look at or where to start. So we have developed an internal team, both on the CVM side, the CVM Finance, VOD, digital sales side, as well as the insights side, where we can focus with you as a client and help you understand the data, help you interpret the data, help you analyze the data. There are great data sources out there, but if you don't know how to effectively use them, then again, you're spending money on things that are not effective and efficient. So, it's a double-edged sword. So we want to always try to figure out where the hockey puck's going. We're not going to just follow the hockey puck, right, as to speak. So we want to understand your business so that we can customize that and understand where you're going, so that we can help you utilize the data as best as possible. Because you might be looking to acquire content, or you might just be a distributor of content, or you might be trying to figure out what's going to be the next diamond in the rough to compete with the major streaming platforms. So there's a lot going on.
Absolutely. So one quick question, you talked about contract. There's a contract component to your platform and contract data, get complicated. Getting the data into the platform, is that something that your system is kind of has an auto ingest, or does it have to be essentially just entered in by humans because it can be so varied and complex?
Yeah, so when we set these platforms up with our clients, we are ingesting massive amounts of data. We have teams that will incorporate that data into the platform. Of course, contracts, change constantly. There's always new contracts. There might be amendments to existing contracts. So yeah, we're managing all of that process on the back end to make sure that the system is reading the most accurate contract. So there is a ramp up process because it does take a little bit of time to ingest. We have an extremely effective QA process to make sure that all of that data that we're ingesting is accurate and that it is tested properly. Goes through a lot of Q&A with our teams. So yeah, it's once that process is completed, it's like rinse and repeat, right? Now you just increase ingest the amendments. Those are updated, and so the systems are constantly updating all of this information, from an agreement standpoint.
Super cool. Very complicated. All right. Well, with that, we're gonna wrap things up for today's webinar. So I want to thank Whip Media and Cory once again for that valuable and thought-provoking presentation today. And thanks to all of you for attending this edition of the OTT.X webinar series. I want to remind everybody about some upcoming events. First of all, on September 1st and 2nd, we're excited to be hosting our first in-person conference since 2019. We're holding our flagship event, the annual OTT.X Summit, Market and Conference and more. We're going to be at the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles. All components of the event are being held outside, and we're taking extra precautions to make sure that are in light of COVID concerns. On November 18th, we'll be once again in New York City for the always popular OTT.X roundtable discussion groups. It's an opportunity to gather with your peers from across the industry, share ideas, learnings, challenges, and best practices about the business and technology of OTT streaming, and maybe eat some pizza together too. On December 8th, we'll be hosting in person again our annual OTT.X at Pipeline event, and the second annual OTT.X Impact Awards to recognize content distributed over the top that inspires positive action and promotes the acceptance of and equality for all people. Speaking of which, I want to remind everyone that content submissions have opened for the Impact Awards. So I want to encourage everybody to submit content for consideration. It's free to all members. So you can find out more about these events and all of the OTT.X programs at our website, OTT.X.org. And you can be sure to sign up and register for the OTT.X Summit out there as well. It's going to be an incredible event. We'd love to see you there. This concludes the webinar. Thank you once again for joining us. By the way, we have recorded it, and it should be available shortly through our website. Thanks again, Cory, and everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.